All right, this is Memory, Section D lecture. Our prioritized standard is 6E. Objectively, we're going to evaluate strategies for improving memory. So mnemonics are techniques for improving memory, especially by making connections between new material and information already in long-term memory. There's lots of different types of mnemonics, more than we'll actually talk about here, but just to give you a sample of some of them. The method of Loki is a mnemonic device that involves associating terms on a list with a sequence of familiar physical locations. So how this works, first you imagine a place you're familiar with. So if you're using your house, the rooms in your house become the objects of information that you're going to need to memorize. Next, you go through a list of words or concepts needing memorization and associate each word with one of your locations. You should go in order so that you'll be able to retrieve all the information in the future in the correct order. So if you're using the method of Loki to try to memorize a recipe, then essentially you can put different items for that in the different rooms in your house. So potentially, hey, I need 2 eggs. There's 2 eggs in the living room. There's a cup of milk in the kitchen. There's a teaspoon of salt in the workroom. There's 4 cups of flour in the master bedroom. There's a cup of nuts in the kids' room. So we're trying to remember where the different items are. Should make it easier to remember all the items. Because you associate the room with the item you're trying to remember. Acronyms and acrostics Acronyms and acrostics are mnemonic techniques that help people remember complicated concepts or particular sequences. An acronym is a mnemonic technique where a word is formed from the first letters or groups of letters in a name or a phrase. So we often talk about STEAM at this school. So science, technology, engineering, arts, mathematics. We just remember the first letter, makes a word, and then based on those letters, we can remember what they stand for more easily. If we were talking about a financial goal, a lot of times they talk about those goals need to be SMART goals, where they are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound goals. So again, remembering the word, and then that helps you remember what those different things stand for, and the correct order for that matter. Acrostic. This is a mnemonic technique where a series of lines from which particular letters form a word or phrase. So a few examples of this example, if you're trying to remember the correct order of operations in math, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Please, or parentheses, excuse for the exponent, my for multiplication, dear for division, Aunt for addition, Sally for subtraction. So potentially you remember that phrase and then try to remember what the first letter of each of those is, and it tells you the correct order also. If you're trying to remember the planets and the order of the planets, one I've heard, my very excellent mother just served us nachos. So you can remember that sentence. Based on remembering that sentence, then hopefully you remember Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. There's Pluto. Another mnemonic are rhymes, which are mnemonic techniques where you use a short set of rhyming lines to aid in recall. Now, since rhyming words sound similar, our brains actually more easily associate them. So in 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So by the rhyming, it just makes it easier for your brain sometimes. Now, a variation on rhyming mnemonics are music mnemonics, where you can aid memory through putting things to a particular tune. So, for instance, many people correctly learn the alphabet through a rhyming mnemonic where they recite it to the tune of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Chunking, we've talked about this before. This is a mnemonic technique where larger pieces of information are broken down into smaller, organized chunks of more easily managed information. So if I gave you this number and say, hey, memorize this number, that would be a harder task than if we chunk it into smaller parts. That would be easier to remember than just a long series of numbers. Now, placing larger quantities of information into smaller chunks helps the brain remember more information and to do so more easily. Chunking is very common with phone numbers, also with social security numbers. Now, chunking is mainly beneficial due to how limited our working memory can be. So since generally our working memory can only hold about 7 items plus or minus 2, this can actually expand the number of items you can remember. A mnemonic technique associated with better remembering a person's name is associating someone's name with something else. So when you think of someone, you think of something that reminds you of that person. Now, actively focusing your attention on the person you are meeting and not being distracted by other things are also helpful in remembering someone's name. Now, focusing on a particular feature of a new person's face can actually make that more easily for you to remember also. And to remember names, it's also important to repeat their name multiple times during the initial meeting. So you especially want to do so in the first few minutes or few seconds of the conversation, if at all possible, and a few minutes into the conversation, then usually once again at the very end. So if they're like, hi, I'm Bob, then you would be like, hi, Bob, nice to meet you, Bob. And then throughout, make sure you say the name Bob again, and then at the end, say, it was a pleasure to meet you today, Bob. That'll make it more likely you actually remember that. So those things together, good things to do to remember someone's name. Now, aside from mnemonics, there are other things that can help improve memory. There are many strategies that can improve memory, like active attention is a major component of memory. So being distracted by other stimuli will greatly decrease the likelihood that information will go beyond working memory into long-term memory. So focusing your attention on what you're trying to do is a very good thing you have to do anytime you want to use memory. Also, spread out study sessions rather than studying through cramming. Remember, we talked about distributed practice is more beneficial than mass practice. If you want to remember something long term, now there is some evidence that can suggest that cramming before a test can actually result in you knowing the information pretty well than even if you distributed it. But if you want to remember any of that information a week later, the amount you remember is going to go down dramatically if it was masked as opposed to distributed. Also, relate new information to things you already know. So as mentioned before, elaborative rehearsal is the best way to try to remember things long term. So whenever I give you a project and I'm asking you to make specific personal examples, that's why I'm doing that, because when you have personal examples that you associate with something new, it actually increases the likelihood that you'll remember that. And also, a healthy lifestyle is associated with improved memory. So research has actually linked exercise with better memory. So while regular exercise is certainly better, even brief exercise can actually still be good for your memory. Sleep. This is important in forming memories, as sleep deprivation severely interferes with hippocampal functioning. So sleeping after learning can actually help you consolidate the information into the long-term memory. And also, sometimes if you're trying to figure out how to accomplish something that might be complicated, it's usually best to actually go to sleep for a little bit. And sometimes your mind, while you're sleeping, will help you work through that problem. Then when you wake up, it can actually be easier to solve that problem then. Also, healthy and non-processed foods are commonly associated with better memory. So for instance, fatty fish, something like salmon, that's going to be rich in omega-3 fatty acid, or DHA. That usually has been proven to help your memory cells communicate more easily. Also, things like berries are good. Caffeinated beverages like tea and coffee, but other types of caffeine works too. Green and leafy vegetables, using extra virgin olive oil instead of other types of oil is better. Eating nuts. So, I mean, there's lots of different types of food that are actually associated with improving your memory. And also, risk factors associated with Alzheimer's disease actually include high cholesterol, high blood pressure, smoking, obesity, type 2 diabetes, and lack of exercise, which all can actually be lessened by adopting a healthy lifestyle. All right, that concludes Memory Section D lecture. Our prioritized standard again was 6E, and objectively now you can evaluate strategies for improving memory.